and welcome to the inaugural episode of Diaspora Dialogue series with LA. I am Lillian Agbeigbe, and what we're doing on the Diaspora Dialogue series is talking to members of the diaspora. We want to overcome the narrative that we all have the same story, we're all coming from the same place, and we're all faring the same here in the diaspora. I am very excited to welcome my first guest on this episode, someone I've known for a very long time. Kunle Faleti, thank you for joining me.
Thank you very much, Lillian. And I'm so honored and I feel so privileged to be your first guest on the program. And yes,
Thank
we've
you.
come a very long way. Over 50 years or so, about?
Absolutely.
In those days, your house was a very important part of our growing up days because of Samco, Big Deep, and Lollipop. We always came to your house to get all that stuff. So, Kunle, tell me, growing up back then in Surulere or Fadeni Ogotaya, did you have it at the back of your mind that you were going to end up in the United States, or how did that happen?
No, not at all. I was I'm a home guy, you know. Momsy sold ice cream. I was, a roots person, grassroots tied to the roots. But it so happened, as things evolved, primary school, Surulere, Government College Lagos, Yaba Tech, NYSC, Ilaro. And it was at some point, right after my NYSC, um, my brother just contacted me that he mentioned this diversity lottery visa that he had done on my behalf. I just got married. I was making change. Nike was making change. I didn't even know what that was all about. But anyway, that was my homecoming to the United States. Yeah, and that was 90, 93, 94, I think. Yeah.
Great.
But I mean, growing up, I didn't have it. I mean, it wasn't a dream. It wasn't, no, no. I
No, it
was
wasn't.
comfortable, to some extent in Nigeria. Yeah, at that time.
Exactly.
Exactly. And that's why we're having this conversation, because everybody thinks everybody was doing poorly and that's why they had to leave. But you were doing fine, the different people have different stories. You were doing fine. You won the visa lottery, your brother had applied for you, and lo and behold, you came to the United States. Since this wasn't an underlying dream for you, what was your reaction when you came? Did you have any surprises? Did you have any expectations that were not met or disappointed? I mean, how did it actually resonate with you?
So in terms of expectations, I didn't have I didn't have an opinion. I didn't have an opinion. I have a lot of friends. I came straight to Maryland, and the thought process was once I get into the mainstream, get the well, we already had the papers, from Nigeria. I was going to go into the mainstream. I was a banker, and then my mindset was to go into the financial services. But I think the what I found out was that banking is so different. Retail banking is so different back home and air. So, retail banking back home, it's a lot of paperwork, it's a lot of people. But even as far back as in the early 90s, most of the things were automated. You go in, you just had a few tellers, So, I mean, I was in risk management, I was in housing finance, mortgages back home in Nigeria then. It wasn't easy finding the right match. So even when I started with Signet Bank, I had to start from a new department, before I there was opening in retail mortgage, But then the way retail the way it's done is quite different. I mean the risk analysis is the same. You look at um, the 5 C's of credit, it's the same everywhere, the analysis, but the way you go about it, automation versus people, that's where the bulk of the difference is.
Different
Yeah.
is awesome.
Well, so when you look back, people do things and look back and say, that wasn't a brilliant idea. So when you look back and you say, my brother set me on this path by applying for me, do you have any regrets? Do you think he should have just left me where I was? Or do you think this was a brilliant idea? Like, if you had the chance to do it again, what would you do?
But I think your question is, do I have any regrets?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So no. No regrets at all. The past 15 years, I've been able to juggle between the United States and Nigeria. I went back home after working with Capital One Bank. After
Okay.
working with them for about 10 years, I got a role, first of all, with UBA as
Okay.
the divisional head of the mortgage. I spent 12 calendar months there, and then I joined Diamond Bank as the CEO of the mortgage subsidiary of Diamond Bank, Diamond Mortgages. And a little bit after, I went to Union Homes as the chief risk officer, So, and after the second consolidation, I came back to my job in the United States. There was no gap, and then I went back to Nigeria now as a consultant for the World Bank to be the mortgage finance specialist for the Nigerian Housing Finance Program. So I think it's kind of a win-win. The things I had done before I came to the US, the things I did well in the US, I was able to marry both and then take back the knowledge, to Nigeria, and it's been good. And ever since then, I mean, every year I go to Nigeria. I'm part of a lot of real estate and housing finance initiatives. So it's
So
That's very good. But do you say that there's some of the benefits of straddling both lands? You're able to go back home, you're comfortable home, but you have the knowledge and expertise here as well. Is there ever going to be a time where you say, I'm just going to go home and stay home, or I'm just going to be the US and stay here? Do you see the benefits of crossing both lands, as it were, of cross pollination?
I mean for me, I'm at the should I say twilight? I'm looking at retirement in terms of full-time employment within the next 5 years. So, and I'll go into full-time consulting. And Africa is a very big market. West Africa is there's so many opportunities. So post-retirement, and that's why I never miss any opportunity to do something back, in the roots. So I'll be cashing in on my social security and pension here in the United States. While I go for the consulting. Yeah, we can never. Our generation, there's so much. The continent needs us. The sub-region needs us. So we can't give enough.
we can't
We
give
can't
enough.
give enough. Yeah. So and for me, it's payback time. Nigeria is my roots. That's the strength of my street knowledge. Through Lere growing up, it taught me to be streetwise. So it's everything I've garnered and acquired in terms of knowledge, skills, and experience. It's payback time.
That's great. And you're talking about Sulere being raised there, but you gotten married before you came and you've raised your kids in the US. What were the cultural issues about being raised in Nigeria and then you raising your kids in the US? Are there things you wished you could have done, or were there things that you were really excited you got to do?
No, so in the corporate world, you have a diverse, you meet with diverse culture, diverse people, the way they talk, expectations, the things you think are funny, it's not funny to them. The things they think are funny, you don't think it's funny. Um, I think one of the things that I found so humbling, you know, um, as an employee in Nigeria, the gap between senior management and the staff, it's so wide. There's so much fear. But I remember, back in Capital One, I go to the cafeteria. The CEO, we sit down, we talk. In Nigeria, Oga, Mr. This. It's a first name basis. Even right now in Truist, my divisional head, who is an executive VP, on the board of directors, I relate to him on a one-on-one, and it does. There's no disrespect. So I think that was a shock for me. Ogambo, Mr. This, you prostrate, you bow. So those little things, So
I remember very well when I came to the US myself. I was an adjunct faculty at Hunter College, City University of New York. I taught my class in the morning because as a graduate student, I went to class in the evening. And so in the morning, my students were like bringing stuff out and they were eating in class. And I was like, what's wrong with these people? But I did catch myself and I didn't tell them off. And then I went to class in the evening and I was so glad I hadn't said anything to my students in the morning because they were my classmates eating in the evening and nobody said anything to them. So I realized that, eating in class wasn't considered disrespectful here in the United States. So that's the work environment. In terms of family, I was asking about raising children. You were raised in Surulere. We went to lesson. Our lesson was like 2 houses away from yours. We bought ice cream after lesson. We played on the streets of Adeniro before it became a commercial center. And we had all of those things. And you raised children in the US. What do you wish you could have been able to do? Or what were you glad you were not able to do, like coming here?
So I'm very thankful to God and to Nike. I couldn't have asked for a better wife. I give her all the credit. We raised the kids up together, but Nike actually dropped her career. She was a banker as well, but when we started having kids, she dropped her career and said, "Look, the children would not go to daycare." Or she raised them up, the culture, everything. We have 3. They have like 3 years in between them, and they don't call each other first name basis. She imbibed that cultural, but Sister Dami, Brakeje. So I give that credit to Nike. They understand Yoruba. She did that 100%. They still speak their Yankee whatever, but when they were even younger, if we want to admonish them or chide them, just talk to them in Yoruba. They understood, even the facial expression, it's not all about speaking. If myself or Nike should look at them in the eye, they got the message, So, even household chores, they started doing it at a very young age. The youngest, after eating dinner, will do the dishes, So, I'm thankful that that part of raising them up, Nike, she did a good job. And, they're all grown up now. We're now empty nesters. They've been to Nigeria by themselves twice. They like it. And while I was in Nigeria, I told you about the engagements.
Yeah.
They attended school. They were there for 2.5, 3 years.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, they went to Green Spring. So they've seen both sides.
Okay.
And they really appreciate it. And they've got friends they made, in those 3 years. And like I said, they've been there by themselves. In fact, KJ just came back from Ghana. last
Mm-hmm.
month. It
Wow.
went 2 years ago. It went last year. So they like Africa. They're positive about
That's
Africa, and and what it brings, and they realize the challenges.
mm-hmm.
Yeah, and every
That's
opportunity in their network, they actually project Nigeria that look, things are not really that bad. Like, so I mean,
mm-hmm.
I thank God. I thank God for it. So they've seen both
That's
sides, and I won't tell them, it's up to them what they're going to do in future,
mm-hmm.
whether, so, but they're pro Africa. They are
That's
pro Africa.
awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And kudos to Nika, like you're saying, because the children that are growing up in Nigeria right now who can't even speak the language. So the fact that you guys came here and she helped and made sure that they kept the culture and kept the language, that's really remarkable.
Listen to this, Lillian. When they came to Nigeria, they were, I mean, like their first month, we speak Yoruba at home, and their friends that live in Nigeria, never lived outside. It's all English, and they're like, you guys, where did you learn to speak Yoruba? And so that's some of the shock for me actually was
Mm-hmm.
when I went to Nigeria, and you see families bringing up kids, and these kids, they can't speak Yoruba, they don't understand the culture. I'm like, okay, so we that we live abroad, we're even doing a better
Yeah,
job than
absolutely.
you. So,
Absolutely. And speaking about those abroad and those in Nigeria, sometimes there's this conflict, and I don't know whether it's real or whether people are faking it. But sometimes people are in Nigeria are like, if you really care about Nigeria, come back here and sit down. You can't live abroad and say you're contributing to the discussions on Nigeria. What's your take on that sort of narrative?
not really, I mean, I have lived, so in the last 15 years, I've lived about 5 years on and off in Nigeria. But even prior to the first engagement with UBA, I did stuff with Lagos State. While I was here during when they were going to set up the home ownership mortgage scheme, I acted as the loan origination, the software management. I served as a consultant. So you don't have to be physically on ground to make an impact. I mean, lots of Nigerians, especially the guys in the medical field, I know doctors every year they go to the west, the east, the north, they pay the bills, they take the
Medical
equipment and everything. They do surgery pro bono, so I mean, you don't have to be there physically. It's all about the will and having the grace and the interest, so you can make a positive impact, whilst you're still in diaspora. You don't have to,
absolutely.
yeah, you don't have to, I mean, take your bags and say, oh, I mean, if you want to go into politics, it's a different ball game. It requires
Mm-hmm.
you to be on ground. If you want political appointments, it's who they see, they relate
Mm-hmm.
with. So, but if you just want to, I mean, impact your area of specialty, or, then you can do it from here.
Absolutely. I think it's important for us to continue to have these conversations. We're not competing with ourselves. If we have skills, knowledge, and competences that can benefit our home country and our colleagues, that we should be able to share them. It's not a case of one person is better than the other. It's just we're working for collective good of the country.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think that's why I identify with. I think Nigeria. There's an agency that Abike Dabiri heads. It's
Yeah.
something to do
Nigeria
with
diaspora.
diaspora. Yeah, I think it might seem like a small agency, but if it is fully, I mean, the potential is it's so. I mean, what it can do, it's enormous. and what it can do, it's so enormous. So I identify with that agency, and I hope that it will be able to reach its potential sooner than later. Because
Yes.
Nigerians are everywhere, as you know. Diaspora is huge. Asia, Latin America.
And as we're talking about Nigerians in diaspora, let's talk about culture and practices. I know we spoke earlier and we said, sometimes you think something is funny and it's not quite funny. But what has been your greatest shock so far? Or your greatest disappointment? Something that you're like, I'm in the United States. I absolutely didn't expect to experience something like this or see something like this.
So, in terms of shock and to my greatest surprise or amazement, uh, handiwork is not appreciated in Nigeria. The plumber, the electrician, the mechanic. I mean, I remember having a problem with my car back in my rookie days. Fa, that's my brother. He gracious enough, he gave me a car. I mean, I didn't have to spend money for so many years. I had a very kind brother. But the car had a fault. And, I just took it to the mechanic, and he said, well, to even diagnose, it was $125 back in the early 90s. Back home, you just take your car to a roadside guy, give him like $20 or even buy, so those are the things. You have a problem at home, you call the plumber. Before he even comes out, he's going to charge you a retainer fee. So for me, that was a big shock. How the things we took for granted, people with handiwork, how they're worshipped here. I mean, it's pretty much, you want them on your side, because their bills could be so high. And yeah, so that was a shock for me. And over the years, I've learned. I mean, I've never been an handy person, but there's some things you just have to learn to replace at home. Because if you call someone to come and do it for you, I mean, that's a couple of $100. So that was a big shock, how under how unrecognized are those hardworking, if I may, laborers. Back home they are like nothing. Even the driver, how many people can afford a driver? I mean, I'm saying this with all sense of responsibility. We got people who come in and clean the house, every month. I mean, they charge so much, but back home, you have an housemaid, you just give them peanuts. Those are the things we take for granted, So those labor, there is really dignity in labor.
So true. I do remember when I started working in the US, I had a colleague whose husband was a metro bus driver, and it was something to be proud of because he belonged to the union. They owned their own house, they went on vacations, they traveled around the country, they traveled around the world.
Very good benefit. Same thing with Amtrak. I mean, it's so, yeah. But back home or back in Africa, those things they look down. But those are essential services. Those are considered essential services. Yeah. So that was a
Absolutely.
big, yeah. I found that a bit. I found it quite not a bit, quite shocking.
That's very interesting. So we've been talking a little bit. We talked a little bit about you retiring and going back home. You stayed very abreast with what's going on in Nigeria. You stayed abreast with what's going, and you're talking about going back home. But how do you interact with the Nigerian community here in the US? How do you stay connected with the diaspora?
Oh, so being a socialite, so they are the friends, you have your friends of orientation, those you grew up with together. You have those you went to school with, and then you have Africans from work. I have friends from Cameroon, from Ghana. When they have their annual event. They invite us out. And, for many years, for many, many, many years, whilst I, I lived in Howard County for about 22, no, about 20 years, Howard County in Colombia. And we had the only African shop in Colombia back then. So it brought in a lot of traffic. So for me, it was like I never even left Nigeria. Nike was selling food stuff, arts and crafts and all that. So that was also kind of a meeting point. From the shop, we graduated to having like a small event place on top, where people came in, they had events and all that. So I've always been at the forefront of networking, if I may.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Contributing to the community here as well. What would you say has been your greatest challenge? And how did you overcome it? I remember when my younger daughter was born here in the US. And I just used to be amazed at how I did it because I would wake up in the morning and I would drive to go and drop her off at the daycare, which was like in the opposite direction from where I worked. I would drive like maybe 2 miles in one direction to go and drop her in daycare, and then I'll come and pass my house to go to work. And then when I closed from work, I had to pass the house again, go pick her to come back home. But in Nigeria, you had the cook, you had the cleaner, you had the driver, you had, so that was a challenge, just something. What was sort of been your challenge and how did you overcome it?
So, I didn't have a challenge in that regard. Again, it was a mindset thing. I knew nobody was going to do it for me. I found things challenging. Credit. There was a time I ran my credit card bills, like it was max. And my scores went down, and it affected a lot of things. Even when I was going to buy a car on credit, the interest rate wasn't the best. I didn't get a good interest rate because of my credit scores. I didn't have a choice. I was running my credit card bills. It wasn't like bad credit in terms of missed payments or anything, but because the percentage of the balance at that time was I had maxed it, yeah. So it affected quite a lot of because I think paying 7% back then when I could have paid maybe 2.34%. Yeah. Right.
Yeah,
So I think it was a bit challenging. I haven't had too many issues at work and my employers have been so fortunate. My current job right now, they encourage me, they support me, they know the advocacy I do for Nigeria, and in fact, at any opportunity there is within the organization, I'm able to share my experience, and they put it on the intranet and all that. So I've been so lucky. There hasn't been issue of racial experience that at all.
Wow.
In all my
All your years, all the
career,
different organizations you've worked
I've
in.
worked with. Rather,
And
they've been very. I mean, look at it this way. My last stint in Nigeria was the World Bank assignment, right? I was with SunTrust Bank, and when I told my boss that, look, there's this opportunity I'd like to take advantage of, and he said, Ade, you have my blessing, you have my support.
wow.
If you don't like it, or if anything happens and you want to come back, and I have,
It's what?
I'll give it to you. And lo and
Wow.
behold, at the end of my contract, 3 months to the end, I sent him an email, and then and I was back to trees. It did not even affect my seniority,
Oh,
you know.
wow.
So my benefits and everything dates back to
Mm-hmm.
my initial date of hire. So I've been quite lucky. I haven't had issues, you know.
So how have you seen that impacting the image of Nigeria? The image of Nigeria depends on who you're talking to. So what have you seen? How has that impacted your experience? What has been your experience, from a Nigerian? What's the perspective of a Nigerian American?
Yeah, it's so I will always the Nigerian in me is always at the forefront, right? Um, but as Nigerians, we need to do when I say we now, I'm not going to point fingers. We need to do more together as a close knit family. And I always use the Asians as an example. Um, in the real estate world, if a Chinese wants to buy a property, the realtor is going to be Chinese, the settlement attorney is going to be Chinese, the title company is going to be Chinese, the loan officer is going to be Chinese. So there's a trust. They do everything, you know, as one. But you know, I've so I mean, you can imagine because of what I do. I mean, I counsel a lot of people, and people actually tell me that look, I don't want a Nigerian loan officer. Why? Because they don't want somebody else to know their business. So those are the challenges we have as a society, you know. Those are the challenges we have as a society. And there's that trust factor or the lack of it, you know, that can I fully trust this person? If I give him my personal information, what is he going to do with it? You know, so I think that those are the, and we read about all these things, you know, so that's the trust factor. I mean, the Latinas, very soon they will be the biggest market in America. You know, they do everything. They keep it within their culture. Their, you know. So if we it's a challenge for us Nigerians.
So I'm having this dialogue series because you may be surprised. Well, maybe you won't be surprised, but you will find people who think that we're all the same. We all came here the same. We all have the same story. But hey, I can talk to somebody else and they didn't come through visa lottery. You've pointed out something that I don't know how many people really paid attention to it. The fact about skilled labor, how that is really very expensive in Nigeria. So there are different people coming, different stories, different perspectives, about what we're doing in the US and how we got here. Any last words for the audience before we sign out?
For everybody that is listening to me, that is of African descent, Nigerian ethnicity, let us pull together as one. We can do so much for the United States. At the same time, there is more in us that we can do for the folks back home. We don't have to wait till a time we're thinking of going back to settle. We can get involved in different advocacies, different groups, by way of contribution, by way of mentoring. Thanks to Zoom and technology, it doesn't even have to be financial. It could be counsel, by way of counsel, by way of mentoring, by advice, So there's so much we can do. As tough as it may be, let's open up to each other by way of trusting in one another. Because if we can overcome that trust factor, then sky is going to be the limit. And thank you so much, Linda. I mean, this is a great initiative. I'll be wooing for you, and I'll make sure I watch as much as I can.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Friends, Diaspora Dialogue Series with Kunle. Kunle's takeaway word for you is you can do what you can, where you are, with what you have. You can make a difference. Join me on my next guest on another episode of the Diaspora Dialogue Series with Kunle when next I come your way. Thank you for listening. Bye.
Ubo kubota na manga, yaji sisa we na rokwa na